So upon reflection of all the research and like contextualizing I've done in my book so far, looking at this idea of what theme I want to use for my FMP, I'm thinking I'm like gonna like talk through this video to like decide on like bits that I want to um basically I want to finalize my theme. So I'm gonna go through and like talk about all the bits that I want to like experiment with and like keep going with and like use throughout my project basically. So I definitely like this idea that I did for my placard experiment, like the collaborative work. Or this idea of like sort of embracing this like lost tradition of wandering and like finding your like these spaces that you have connections to and just making those connections with those places that I feel like is completely lost or like not completely lost but very very unseen in like today's generation because of like Google Maps and just like TFL and like there's things where it just limits us from wandering and like stumbling upon these places that we can like learn to love. And yeah, I think that's like a really nice thing. And I want my work to kind of like be relatable but in like a sort of ambiguous way. I think to start off with this theme, and maybe I'll continue with it, I think the idea of photography is going to be a really key aspect in this. From my research on photography, Susan Sontag's sort of idea that a photograph is a reality in its own right, and it's sort of like a shadow of reality. When she was talking about how photography is like the rawest element of surrealism, I think that would be a really interesting thing to experiment with, especially this idea of suggesting a space rather than showing like a direct depiction of it. And I think I want to use like old photography methods like film photos and hopefully like there's like photographic slides which I could like experiment with because I can put my like the raw film, my film camera film, and stick it onto the slides and I can project my negatives. And I think that sort of idea of like using photography in that way would just be a really nice thing to experiment with in this project because I want to make some like site specific works and then later on I'll figure out or like experiment with how I can move that type of work into a gallery space. So it's almost like moving my like the connection I have with this one space, that place, moving elements from that or whatever I want to portray from that place into a gallery space will be like the main focus of what I want to do because it's going to be tricky to, I don't know how I want to do it yet, but I want to make sure that I'm suggesting a space in my final outcome. I want to make sure that you can tell that it's a space in memory and I don't want it to be like completely realistic, like this is exactly a photo of one space. I don't want that at all. I also think it would be really fun to experiment with when I start doing like sort of site-specific experiments, to look at how places can like hold memories of other places. So you would be in one place, so like the forest, and I could have like moments, either photos or writing or like other things that would suggest like the alleyway by my house or my bedroom. So it's sort of like you're immersed in one space, but the artwork that you're watching is suggesting another space. So you're almost using your imagination to picture that space or like imagine that space. And I think that might be the way that I can make it more relatable because the viewers having to use their imagination and moments of their own bedroom or their own like personal spaces might come into their mind, and then it will make it more personal rather than just looking at spaces that are important to me. I'm really enjoying the idea of like it being almost like a false perception of the space. So like you're seeing it through how I can remember it in my like faded memory because I've been to these spaces all the time, but I'm doing it from memory. Like I don't want to depict it realistically how it actually is. I want to depict the places of how I could remember them and how I almost see them. So you're again sort of like looking through this my own perception and looking to these spaces, but like through my eyes almost. So I'm not really sure, but that'll be something that I really want to play around with because I think that's like a really important part of this project because it's going to be quite personal, but I don't want it to be too personal that you can't relate to it. I want it to be like quite ambiguous, like you can relate in your own memories, in your own places. I also think it could be quite fun to play around with this idea that you and the space you have an emotional connection to have this mutual desire to preserve. So you're both preserving these memories of each other. So me in the space and the space in me, and sort of that, yeah, that preservation and that idea of like remembering but like certain fragments of what goes on in those places. And I think that could be really nice to um try and portray. I think the idea of like these like fragments of memories being like almost like romanticized in my mind because of this like emotional connection I have with them will be something that's really nice to explore, because I can like work with these spaces but take like the best moments from them and expand them into being like this quite like fantastical moments um of memory of those spaces. And I think that'd be really nice to explore. I think I have decided that I'm going to call this theme topophilia, which is the emotional connection to a place. And because I think that's like a broad term that kind of sums up everything I want to explore, and that sits really nicely with all these thoughts I just spoke about. And yeah, it's like it doesn't limit me at all, and it's just something that I can quite easily refer back to and relate all of my experiments to that I can think of, yeah.